right, ladies and gentlemen, these are our notes about solving quadratic equations. So you can go ahead and add your name on the front if you haven't yet done so, and fill in your table of contents. This is going to go on slide 8, solving quadratic equations. So this is a review lesson from Integrated Math 2. You can pause here and then go to, I guess, slide 8. This is uploaded onto the Google Classroom assignment as a PDF if you want to print it. Other than that, you're just going to handwrite everything onto a sheet of paper. So the first thing you guys can write down is the title, Solving Quadratic Equations Notes. Again, this is review, it's not new. You do not have to write down the essential question that's located on your slide 8 already. But basically we want to know how many ways we can solve a quadratic equation, to be able to describe them, which one do you think is easiest and which one do you think is hardest. That's what you want to be able to answer at the end of today's notes. So a quadratic equation is an equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. And we want all of our equations today to be equal to 0. So in order to be able to do the 3 ways to solve, you have to have your equation equal to 0. If it's not, you just rearrange the pieces so that they're all on the same side and your equation is equal to 0. It's quadratic, that means the highest degree is 2. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different ways to solve. The first way that we can solve quadratic equations is by factoring. So again, you want your equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. In order to solve by factoring, you use the Snowflake method. We use the Snowflake method to factor. Then set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So as like a little tiny reminder about Snowflake, what it looks like, you multiply a times c on the top, b goes on the bottom, you have your ax right here on top of these little fractions. You need to find 2 numbers that will go here that multiply to a times c but add to b. Don't forget to simplify these little fractions. Okay, and that's what will create your polynomial. That will give you your 2 factors. Whatever you get inside those 2 parentheses, you're just going to take both of those. You just take those equations, set equal to 0, and solve. So I didn't like fill them in. I don't have any like specific numbers, but whatever you get in those parentheses, you just set them each equal to 0 and solve. Let's go do an example of this. So you're going to want to flip your page over to like the other side. Or get a separate sheet of paper, because you'll do one picture of the notes part and then one picture of the examples part. So we're going to do an example of 2x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0. So it's perfect. It's in that form where we have a, b, c, and it's equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to start by setting up our snowflake. On top, you multiply a times c, so 2 times 1 is 2. On the bottom, you put your b, that's 3. And then on the top of your fraction, you put your ax, so 2x, 2x. I need to find 2 numbers that multiply to 2 but add to 3. So multiplies to 2, adds to 3, that would just be 2 times 1. That's the only thing that multiplies to 2. But if you notice, this little fraction over here is going to simplify. So my factors are x plus 1 times, this one didn't simplify, 2x plus 1. We set that equal to 0. So that's what we would stop last unit. We would just factor. We didn't do any solving. So once you set your you have your factors in your parentheses, you just set each of those parentheses equal to 0 and solve. So I subtract 1 to both sides. I get x is equal to -1. That's one answer. And then over here, I subtract 1 on both sides. But that gives me 2x equals -1, so I have to divide both sides by 2 to get x equals -1/2. So I got 2 solutions, x equals -1 and x equals -1/2. All right, so here's the deal. Not every problem can be factored, okay? Not every problem is factorable. So there is a way that we can do any problem, even if it's not factorable, and that is called the quadratic equation, or the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, you also have to have it in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So remember, it always has to be equal to 0. The quadratic formula, for those of us who may not remember, is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All you need to do is just plug in your a, b, and c and solve. So let's go do an example of this. So our second example we're going to do is 3x squared plus x equals 3. So right off the bat, I noticed something, that it's not equal to 0. So the first thing I need to do is actually get it into the correct form of ax squared plus bx, there's a 1 in front, plus 1x minus 3 equals 0. So it has to be equal to 0 before you can start. All right, I'm going to identify my A, my B, and C, and we're going to plug those things into the quadratic formula. So remember, it's x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So wherever I see an A, I'm going to plug in the number 3. So these two places, I'm going to plug in the number 3. Wherever I see a B, I'm going to plug in the number 1. And then wherever I see a C, I'm going to plug in negative 3. Okay, so that's how it works. I'm going to plug all of those things in where they go. All right, so I have a negative. I'm going to show my work kind of over on the side so I have a little more room. I plug in negative b, so x is equal to negative, my b is the number 1, plus or minus the square root, b is the number 1 squared, minus 4 times a is 3 times c is negative 3 all over 2 times a, which was 3. All right, and we always start with simplifying under the radical. Okay, so that's where we're going to start. Our simplifying is right under there, under the radical. So I have x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root. 1 squared is 1. And then I have negative 4 times 3, that's a negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 3 would be a positive 36. Divided by 2 times 3 on the bottom is 6. All right, I'm going to keep simplifying. So I have x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 37 divided by 6. All right, well, the square root of 37, I know the square root of 36, I know the square root of 49. The square root of 37 is what we call an irrational number. It can't be square rooted evenly, so its decimal goes on forever. So we can either leave our answer like this, but I want you to know that it means that there's two answers. X is equal to negative 1 plus the square root of 37 over 6, and x is equal to negative 1 minus the square root of 37 over 6. And that's how we would leave our answers. It's possible that you might rewrite it as like negative 1/6 plus square root of 37 over 6. Like that's one way that you could see it, but that's fine to just leave your answers like so. All right, let's talk about the third way to solve quadratic equations, and that way is by graphing. The last way to solve quadratic equations. You just graph the function, or graph the, yeah, we'll call it the function. Graph the function and see where it crosses the, or see where it hits the x-axis. These are sometimes called zeros. You may hear it called roots. You may call it solutions, answers. They all mean the same thing. If on the graph, it's where your graph crosses the x-axis. Those are the solutions. okay? All right, so what we're gonna do for our last example, it's really two examples. We're gonna solve number 1 and number 2 by graphing. We're gonna do those two problems that we just did, and we're gonna do them by graphing. The preferred graphing method that we are going to use is the Desmos calculator. So Desmos is what's embedded onto your state tests, is onto Illuminate they use it. So you want to try to use Desmos to be like familiar with it. So they even have an app, so I pulled up my app. And you're just gonna make sure your equation is equal to 0, and then you just type it in. So 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. And it graphs our equation. We can even zoom in and everything, and you can see right where your graph, I don't know if it'll, won't let me like touch it, but you can see your two solutions where it crosses the x-axis, and it crosses the x-axis at -1/2 and -1. So those are the same answers that we got when we did the problem earlier. So we got right here, we got -1 and -1/2, but on the graph, so remember on the graph, it hit at -1 and it hit at -1/2, and it was a parabola that looked like so. So the answers, if you're trying to solve by graphing, you just have to, you can use your Desmos calculator. We could graph it by hand, but we want to use technology where we can, so we want to use Desmos and graph it, and then just see where it crosses the x-axis. So let's do the second one. Number 2 was 3x squared plus x equals 3. So we want to make sure we use the one where it's equal to 0 already, right here, 3x squared plus x minus 3, and that's what we're going to type into our Desmos app. So I'll exit that one out, and this one was 3x squared plus x minus 3. All right, so I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit more to see, and we can see our answers are where it crosses the x-axis, and our answers are at 0.847 and -1.18. Well, that doesn't look like the answers that we got when we typed them in, but we had them in like a radical form still. So it would be the same as doing like -1. Hopefully they use that as a negative sign, okay. -1 plus the square root of 37 divided by 6 gives us that 0.847. That's this one over here. They just rounded. And then our second one is that -1 minus the square root of 37 divided by that 6, and that's what gives us that -1.8. So even though we have our answers written in these radical forms, if you used a calculator to simplify it, you would still get those same answers. So -1.18 and 0.847, so that's what we're going to put onto our little graph. I know it's kind of hard because they were decimals, but one of them was at 0.847, so that would be here close to 1, that's 0.847, and then the other one was at -1.18, so that'd be over here, -1.18, and then our parabola was opening up, so we're gonna go ahead and just draw a rough sketch. So I'm really just like want to make sure that you guys can see, like this one was at -1/2 and this one was at -1, that you know what numbers it hits the x-axis at, and you can just draw a sketch. So your homework tonight, you'll be doing all 3 of these things. So they're all technically review, being able to solve by factoring, solve using the quadratic formula, and solve by graphing. So remember, we go ahead and go to slide number 8, and on the left side we put our like our notes, the things that we wrote down, and then on the right hand side we put our examples. So you need to go right now and put those pictures in. There's a little sticky note for you to put your summary, a sticky note for any questions you guys have. There's a sticky note with the essential question that you should be able to answer after our notes. Okay, bye.